My brother's famous bottom goes camping. Chapter 2, The Two-Legged Tent. Boy, oh boy, what a rumpus. Big time. We've had a fox in the garden. It was after the chickens, of course, in the middle of the night. Dad said he reckoned the fox fancied a 5-course meal. It would have Captain Birdseye for starters, then chicken nugget 1, then chicken nugget 2, then Yes, Ron, Mum cut in. We get the picture. There's no need to go through the whole menu. Want a chicken nugget, demanded Cheese. See what you've started, Mum complained. I knew those hens would be trouble. It's all your fault. Dad's eyes boggled. My fault? How come? You got the hens. Yes, because you said you wanted some eggs, Dad protested. Exactly. I wanted eggs, Ron. I sent you out to get some eggs and you came back with 5 chickens. So, I got you eggs on a time delay. They'll be fresher that way. New laid, smiled Dad. And how many eggs have they laid so far? None. And now we have a fox. It may not have got any of the hens this time, but it will be back. You can be sure of that, and then you can say goodbye to your hens, not to mention all the eggs they haven't even laid yet. Dad went stomping off, wearing a dark frown on his face. It's best not to talk to him when he gets like that. I knew that frowny face. It didn't mean he was cross. He was thinking, and he was bound to come up with a plan sooner or later. He always does. My dad's clever like that. Sure enough, he came stomping back an hour later and announced his brilliant plan. He was planning to keep guard over the hens all night. You can't stand out there right through the night, Mum told him. I'll lie down, said Dad. You can't lie down either, Mr. Dopey Drawers. Suppose it rains. I shall be safe and snug in my tent, Dad said. What tent? You haven't got a tent. Yes, I have. I shall use the twins' play tent. Mum burst out laughing. It's for babies, she giggled. It's too small for you, you elephant. Isn't, scowled Dad. Mum had to go off to another room, but we could still hear her laughing. Dad looked across at me. Don't pay any attention to your mother, Nicholas, he said. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I'll show her. You wait and see. You'll be very impressed. Dad nodded a lot, as if he was trying to convince himself that his plan would work. Oh, by the way, he added suddenly, can I borrow your old water gun? Foxes can't stand getting wet. They're like dogs, you know. They hate water. Dad, it's cats that aren't supposed to like water. Really? Oh, well, they're much like cats, foxes are. They both have long tails. If I had a long tail, I wouldn't like it to get wet. Would you, Nick? I might if I was a crocodile, I pointed out, and Dad gave me a sharp look. The trouble with you, Nick, he said, wagging a finger at me, is that you go to school and you learn things, and then you come home and upset me with what you know. I grinned back at him. You don't like me being right, I said. Exactly, Dad agreed. Now, can I borrow your water splurter or not? Of course you can. So last night, Dad set up the twins' little play tent right beside the hen run. Then we all watched while he tried to squeeze inside. Daddy's too big, said Tomato. Fat Daddy, said Cheese. I am not fat, shouted Dad. This tent is stupid. I've never seen such a small tent. A mouse couldn't go camping in this. Dad finally managed to make himself reasonably comfortable, even though his feet were sticking out one end of the tent and his head and shoulders were sticking out of the other. The tent only covered a little bit in the middle. There, said Dad. That's fine. The rest of us couldn't speak for laughing. You've never seen anything like it. All right, laugh if you must, snapped Dad. I'll show you. When that fox comes, he's going to get the biggest surprise of his life. He certainly will when he sees you wearing a tent like a miniskirt, shrieked Mum. We left Dad to it. I went up to bed and fell asleep. And then, shortly after midnight, I was woken by the most dreadful noises and a bright light streaming through my curtains. I thought the Martians had invaded. I whisked back the curtains and peered outside. A giant beam of light had flooded our garden. It came from next door. Mr. Tugg is not only the world's angriest man, he also runs the local neighbourhood watch. He's always trying to get people arrested. I dropped a crisp on the pavement near his house last week, and he tried to get me arrested for dropping litter. Then a pigeon waddled up and ate it. Mr. Tugg was furious. He accused the pigeon of eating the evidence. I think he wanted to arrest the pigeon too. Anyhow, Mr. Tugg is very hot on security, and he's got searchlights mounted at the front and the back of his house. He switches them on if he thinks there are burglars around, and it looked like he'd spotted one in our garden. Mr. Tugg was chasing a tent on legs round and round the hen run, while the tent on legs kept spraying Mr. Tugg with high-powered jets of water from my water gun. Then Dad tried to escape by dashing into the run and hiding behind the hen coop. Mr. Tugg came roaring after him, slid on all the wet mud and went crashing into the hen house. Hens came hurtling out, flapping and clucking as if the sky had fallen in on them. Mr. Tugg threw himself on top of Dad, blew his whistle and tried to arrest him, while Dad made several useless attempts to get back on his feet. After that, the whole thing turned into the weirdest pyjama party you can imagine. Mum rushed out of our house in her pyjamas, closely followed from next door by Mrs. Tugg in her nightie. They dashed over and tried to separate the two mud wrestlers. It wasn't long before they ended up in the mud too, and that was when Mum finally snapped. "Stop!" she bellowed. The fighting ceased at once. At last Dad and Mr. Tugg looked at each other properly for the first time. "You idiot!" hissed Mr. Tugg. "I thought you were a burglar." "And I thought you were a fox," Dad growled. "Do I look like a fox?" cried Mr. Tugg. "No, you look like a hard-boiled egg with a moustache." "You're crazy," roared Mr. Tugg, trying to brush great wadges of mud off his clothes and only smearing it even further. "I always knew you were off your head." And so it went on. It took Mum and Mrs. Tugg 10 minutes to get them calmed down. Eventually, Mr. Tugg was dragged back to his own house, and my mum persuaded Dad he should come back into our house for the rest of the night. After that, everything was peaceful, at least until morning. Breakfast was a very quiet affair. Mum would hardly speak to Dad, she was still so cross with him. Dad pretended he hadn't done anything wrong. "And besides," he pointed out, "the fox didn't come back, did it? I told you I'd protect the hens, and I did." Mum took a deep breath. "I don't suppose those hens will ever lay eggs now. First they almost get eaten by a fox, and then they have to put up with you and Mr. Tugg playing at cops and robbers." Dad opened his mouth to protest, but one look at Mum's face told him he'd do a lot better to keep quiet. So he did. However, I was wondering what he would do next.